Growing up South Asian or Desi, there was always one name that you knew when you heard it, it meant business. Patel. The surname Patel has literally become synonymous with business, especially hotels. In the United States, over 1/3 of hotels are owned by Indians, 70% of whom have the last name Patel. It's been called the Patel Hotel phenomenon, Potels, the Patelification of the American hospitality industry. So how did this all even start? How did Indian Americans, especially those from the Indian state of Gujarat with the last name Patel, end up owning almost 40% of the hotel industry? I'm Sana, this is AJ Plus, and this is the story of the Patels of America and the story of the struggles and successes of immigrant communities. The story of the Patel starts with an undocumented immigrant from Mexico. Yep. A Gujarati man by the name of Kanjibai Desai moved from the West Indies by way of Mexico to San Francisco in the 1920s. In the early 1940s, he was living in a residential motel called the Goldfield, which was run by a Japanese American. When FDR's executive order came down and forced over 100,000 Japanese Americans into incarceration camps, Desai decided to buy the lease from the Japanese American owner, apparently for like a couple $100. When the United States loosened restrictions on immigration in 1965, there was an uptick in Indian immigration and an uptick in Indians buying hotels. And a lot of the Indian hospitality pioneers apparently actually stayed in Desai's hotel and were inspired by him. And because so many were coming from farming backgrounds back in India, meaning they owned their own land and sowed their own crops, they didn't want to work for anyone. They wanted to be in charge. Plus, think of it this way. You're moving to a new country and you need to find a way to survive, make money, and you find out there are people in this new country who maybe share your language and experience, and they're doing something that seems stable or successful. And you've got access to them and to their knowledge on the how to get started details, so why not, right? There was also the added bonus, depending on how you see it, of owning a hotel where you didn't have to pay rent. In fact, a lot of families lived, and many still do, in the hotels that they managed. And the kinds of hotels they were managing were low and middle budget places like Motel 6s, travel lodges, and Holiday Inns. They would take run-down roadside properties and turn them around. And Indian Americans were pivotal in spreading franchises like Days Inn and Best Westerns because they were willing to move to some of the most remote areas of the country. Now, Indian Americans still dominate the low-budget sector of the hospitality industry, but there has been some movement to the higher end of the industry. Take, for example, the story of Hasu P. Shah, an Indian American, also Gujarati, who started with a small motel in Pennsylvania. It had 23 rooms, and he and his family lived there behind the motel lobby. That business eventually evolved into the Harsha Hospitality Trust, which owns about 52 hotels and is worth over $2.5 billion. And new Indian immigrants are still going into the business. After all, the network that's available to them in the industry is huge. But while there is this fascination with the Patels of America and their pioneering history in the hotel industry, they and their story are romanticized a little too much. I actually called up Pawan Dhingra, who wrote the book on this topic, and while he focuses on the inspiring story of hard-working Indian Americans in the hotel industry, he actually made some pretty good points about how that success hasn't come easy.
Indian Americans have achieved a great amount, but that doesn't mean they've achieved full belonging and acceptance. People avoid their motels if they think it's Indian-owned or walk into the motels with a negative attitude. There's still stereotypes that they have to encounter. They still have to prove themselves as legitimate owners in a business.
So the story of the Patels is similar to the stories of countless immigrant communities in this country. And that's a story that's more about the struggle of living in America rather than the dream. So there you have it, guys. A quirky, interesting part of American history and the American immigrant experience. Have you guys ever stayed in a Potel? And what are some other immigrant stories that you're interested in hearing about? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.